Years ago, a group of friends and I put on a play for the neighborhood children, a Christmas play. And I remember being really excited that one of the churches we were connected with gave us some puppets. It meant we didn't have to do a bunch of, arts and crafts stuff. It's not my best thing. But one of my friends noted, all of these puppets are made with very light stockings. That was Ming. Ming is a Chinese-American woman who's very committed to racial justice. She says, these puppets make all of our characters appear white. And I remember being like, oh, Ming, we're gonna have to cut open all these puppets and make them new and glue new eyes. And she said yes. And so we did. And I'll tell you, it was unforgettable, this moment in the play, when the angels appeared in the puppet theater sky to the lost shepherds looking for baby Jesus. The kids watching the play were literally screaming, "The angels are black! They're black angels!" That is a moment I will not forget. Just how important it was that the significant character, the one that helped, the one that we could see, looked like the folks who were watching it. It mattered. I was reminded of that story again recently because I've been reading the autobiography of one of the biggest stars in Hollywood right now, Viola Davis. In her book, she describes growing up in poverty right here in Rhode Island. And it is hard to read. She talks about the smells, the experiences, the drama, the abuse, just what it looks like to grow up in poverty. But she also describes this other layer of challenge that stayed with her even beyond her being poor. She talks about growing up Black and feeling insignificant and unseen. Interestingly, Viola Davis grew up in Central Falls, Rhode Island, and in her book, she talks about going from Central Falls to Pawtucket for a number of different reasons. These cities are right next to one another, and they are known as the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution. That is one of the biggest, most significant incidences of the modern era. The Industrial Revolution is when gross domestic product grows all over the world. Incomes went up, public goods were formed like parks and Head Starts because we had the money to do them. There was also something very ugly that happened during the Industrial Revolution. What happened was folks moved from rural areas and they went to urban areas because now there were factories to work in. But in those factories in the city, for the sake of that dollar, we used and abused our women who were poor. We used and abused our children who were poor. We used and abused our migrants and our immigrants. And then there was this whole other group of people that were used and abused, and we don't even connect them to that great story. Because at that time, those people were thought of as tools, as part of the machinery that we owned to make our products more affordable. And those were Black people. How we tell our stories and who is significant is so important. I was able to find something that Pawtucket, the city, published 150 years after the Industrial Revolution started there. It was called the Sesquicentennial Celebration, and there was a guide that came with it. And in that guide, it talked all about how the cotton industry changed this city. It made this city. It talked about all these decisions that were made that sort of made the difference. But in this celebration, in this guide, there was not one mention of Black people or slavery. how we tell our stories matter. It mattered to young Viola growing up in Central Falls. Man, I could tell you some stories about how it matters to me, Leslie, living now in Central Falls and Pawtucket. It mattered to me even when I was a young girl growing up in the deserts of California. It mattered to my parents, to my grandparents. It mattered to George Floyd and to Trayvon Martin. These stories of who is significant matter. And so it is time that we start retelling our great stories. There's some good work out there to retell our stories. Work like the 1619 Project that's looking at American history and really pointing out the significance of Black people through the whole thing. One thing I would note is that how we understand who's important not only comes when we're reading or watching podcasts. What's telling us who and what is significant comes out in what we see, what we experience every day. I've had a few different jobs, and one of my first jobs was working as a calculus and algebra teacher out of college. I just remember during that time that I spent a lot of time doing this. And what I was trying to explain was that if you are saying things are equal, you have got to pay attention to what happens to one side of that equation. If you take away from one side, you have got to add back to make it equal again. If you take away and give it to another side, you have got to do something pretty dramatic to make it equal. And so if we are looking to equal out the significance and tell that story in a way that makes it clear, man, there were some other people who were significant in these stories, we are going to have to do something dramatic. My current job is being a Christian urban missionary. And what that means is that really I've been freed up to spend more time thinking about how to bless people, looking for levers to make impact in communities. And right now, what I've chosen to do is purchase property. Because if I own the property, I can think about ways to be creative and create opportunities. I have started a company. That company is called Core Collaboratives. It's called that because we're looking at the city core. This is the place where money comes. It's made for people to be able to get to that place pretty easily. It's the hub. And I believe that the hub should be the place where people who need resources the most can benefit from all of these connections. And so my company, Core Collaboratives, through me acquiring a good amount of personal debt, has purchased a number of properties in Central Falls and downtown Pawtucket. And we have a project that we're working on. It is called the Halo. And the Halo is meant to take all of these properties, these complexes, and make opportunity for different groups of people to be able to tell their story, to be able to show themselves significant in this city, in this area. What better place than the place where the city became the place to be, to reimagine a more just city? So how are we doing that in the Halo? One of our sites, it's actually a mega site because we have a number of properties right in the same place, downtown Pawtucket. We call it the Black Block. In the Black Block, we are looking to make sure people know that in the story of the Industrial Revolution, Black people were very important. And so we're doing some pretty dramatic things to make sure we get that. We are painting murals of Black people all over downtown Pawtucket so that when you go there, it is clear not only are there some really cool buildings, but Black people have something to do with this. Another thing that we're doing is we're taking old department stores, with people's names that I don't really know what they did. But we are reclaiming those, and we're saying, hey, instead of one person making all the money from this big building, let us make it possible for more people. People who have not traditionally been able to start businesses, let them benefit from being in the community core. And so one of our buildings we made into a mini mall. And that mini mall, we did everything we could to make it affordable for people to try. People without a lot of resources, people with not a lot of access to capital, especially Black people. We wanted to be able to come and try running a shop. Now, we know that entrepreneurship is basically trying and failing and trying again. That is not typically affordable to people who have not had a lot of resources. And so we're making it affordable, and we're making it a realistic expectation that that will happen in our spaces. We also understand when we're thinking about trying to bring more people into this picture, into this downtown, that there are a lot of people who can't just leave their job, try this whole entrepreneurship thing. And so we have built public spaces inside of our buildings. One of our buildings, we call it the Green on Main, named after Victor Hugo Green, the Black man who wrote the Green Book that helped Black people know where it was safe to travel. Inside the Green on Main, there are booths that we have built in. It was an old fabric store. We cleaned it out and made it an indoor park with these booths so that folks who cannot afford to leave their jobs, they can come whenever they want to this park, right? Parks are always open. You can come and you can sell and you can store your things and come back when you can. We've also taken an old insurance company and we're building a theater inside of it. We're doing everything we can to make sure that theater has professional lights, professional sound equipment, so that people who have different gifts can be in the city core and offer those gifts, dance, singing, spoken word. We want them to make money from those gifts in our city core. Now, we know that housing has been one of the biggest challenges when we are trying to develop cities equitably. There's all these questions about gentrification, making the city work for some people and not others. And so with our housing, we are trying to build housing in these old buildings that work for people with normal jobs, make normal money, maybe our entrepreneurs on this block. But we know those buildings are really expensive to build in. And so what we're doing is pairing, we call it workforce housing, people with normal jobs can afford it. We're pairing that kind of housing with short-term rentals. Things like Airbnbs and boutique hotels. We do need more money to make this work. We want people who have the resources to come and enjoy the culture that these other residents are bringing to the block. It's what makes it special. We want them to come and consume and spend their tourist dollars, but they don't have to own it. We can all enjoy it. We're really excited about testing out and trying some of these things to give folks who have not traditionally had an opportunity to share themselves, their culture, their community in the core of our cities. But what we're really hoping that comes from this is as more of us hear these stories, that when the questions come to me, and often they won't come to me, they'll probably come to you. Why is she painting those murals of Black people? Why is she bringing people that don't seem like they have a lot of money to start businesses? Why is she renaming buildings that had a name for like 150 years? That you can, just like this, say, do you know the story? Do you know that the grandparents and great-grandparents of some of these people worked really hard and they didn't get the resources? Do you know that a lot of laws were made that stopped them from generating capital? They didn't have wealth. And do you know that some of these people did apologize who got that wealth, but they didn't have to give that wealth back? And so something dramatic and drastic has to happen in order to have a more equal telling, a more equal showing of who and what is important in our communities. We need you to say, do you know the story? And right now, the questions are just going to be about Black people, but soon they're going to be asking, why is she moving people who had addictions into these nice new buildings in our community, right? When the next site comes. Why is she moving people who have had convictions right next to us? Why is she doing that? And we want all of us to be able to say, man, I have heard the story. Turns out these are the great-grandchildren of people who have experienced major poverty here. They've been here, but they did not benefit from the work and the labor and the contributions of some of the people who came before them. You know, the story is actually that some of these folks were given medications by doctors, over-medicated, and they got addicted and they didn't have the money to change that situation. Some of the pharmaceutical companies lied about the addictive nature of these medications. And you know what? They did have to pay some fine, but they still have nice houses. So man, we should probably make it possible for everybody to have a nice house. We have to say, do you know the story? But we need to hear those stories so that we understand the stories. We're excited about making spaces where people get to tell their own stories. We believe that we should see hubs like the Halo and the Black Bloc all over the country. We also believe that these cities that we live in, that were started in such an unjust way, will be a lot more just when we do these things. Thank you.